Bonjour, Jalasi. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our February 24th, 2026 Black and Indigenous Speaker Series event. My name is Jackie Gahagan. I'm the Associate Vice President here at Mount St. Vincent University, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here today. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that Mount St. Vincent University is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, first signed by the British Crown in 1725. And it's important to note that these treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands and resources, but in fact, it recognized Mi'kmaq and Maliseet title and established the rules for what was to become an ongoing relationship between nations. Mount St. Vincent University acknowledges with deep respect the long history of cultural traditions of the Mi'kmaq. And in terms of MSVU's commitment to maintaining and building relationships that are informed by principles of trust, respect, reciprocity, and collaboration, all in the spirit of reconciliation. And for me personally, and in my role at Mount St. Vincent University, this means seeking to understand and address the ways in which colonial structures and processes within research ecosystems have caused harm to Indigenous peoples, and to work towards addressing these harms caused by our approaches to research. And if you have the chance to please take a moment and look at our MSVU Research Strategic Plan, and in there you'll find more information about the actions that we are taking to conduct research at the Mount in a good way. I would also like to acknowledge that people of African descent have been in Nova Scotia for over 400 years, and we honor and offer gratitude to those ancestors of African descent who came to this land before us. Just briefly, for those of you who don't know, the purpose of the Black and Indigenous Speaker Series here at Mount St. Vincent University is to highlight and showcase the important work of Black and Indigenous scholars across Turtle Island. Through these presentations, we aim to highlight Black and Indigenous scholars and invite them to share their knowledges and worldviews, and to gain a better understanding of their contributions to their respective fields and how we can all benefit from their knowledge. It's important to note that the Black and Indigenous Speaker Series strives to provide a safe and welcoming place for sharing ideas in a good way. And with the permission of our Black and Indigenous speakers, we record these talks and make them available for teaching and learning opportunities. I'm really pleased to have Dr. Rachel Zellars with us today, who will be speaking on the topic of Black thriving in Impossibility, which explores life beyond survival. I will now turn the floor over to Suella, our MSVU student, who will introduce Dr. Zellars and who will moderate the Q&A session following Dr. Zellars' talk. Again, thank you for being here and welcome.
Hey, thank you so much, Jackie. So as Jackie mentioned, I'm Suella. I'm very excited to be here today for this talk. I'm a Bachelor of Public Relations student, and it is my absolute honor to introduce Dr. Zellars today. So this talk, Black Thriving in Impossibility, will be a keynote on life beyond survival, as Jackie also mentioned. Drawing on Black radical thought and traditions, this talk will explore how Black communities create joy, vision, and freedom inside systems designed to constrain them. This talk will also invite our audience today here and those watching online maybe at a later time to consider thriving not as an exception or resilience alone, but as a deliberate practice of refusal, care, and world making that is ultimately threatening to power. It is a call to recognize Black thriving as both an act of love and a blueprint for futures that have already been imagined and are already being built. And specifically, as I said, I'm very excited to have Dr. Rachel Zellars with us here today, who has an MA, a GD, and a PhD, and is a legal scholar, associate professor, and senior research fellow in social justice and community studies at St. Mary's University here in Halifax, a nationally recognized expert at the intersection of law, history, and public policy. And her research focuses on anti-Black racism, institutional accountability, and systematic inequalities in public government. Dr. Zellars led the landmark national study for Black executive community in federal public service, which is shaping 2026 federal reforms on leadership equity and systematic anti-Black racism. And her ongoing research examines historical exclusion, government structures, and recourse mechanisms, revealing the disproportionate procedural and psychological burdens faced by Black people and racialized public servants. In 2021, she was the inaugural Jocelyn Bourgon Visiting Fellow at the Canada School of Public Service, conducting pioneering research on merit and inclusion in government institutions. Her work has informed executive level policy, equity reforms, and discussions on procedural fairness and accountability across federal departments. Dr. Zellars is an award-winning educator and has been recognized for excellence in teaching and research, including the SMUSA Award for Overall Excellence in Education in 2021, the Father Williams A. Stewart S.J. Medal for Excellence in Teaching in 2025, and the Dr. Geraldine Thomas Education Leadership Award in 2025. We are very honored to have you here with us today, Dr. Zellars, and I will pass on the floor to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Suella. Can you just give me a thumbs up that you can hear me okay? And I'm going to share my screen, Suella, so I just need a thumbs up that you can actually see my screen. Is that fine for you?
Yes, we can
great.
see the screen and hear you great.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. Well, we're shifting. This is very appropriate for our conversation for the theme of today. Here, I want to just start with a question, and it's a reflection. It's a question that I'll repeat, and it's one I've been sitting with since the end of 2024. What does it mean to hold on to our most cherished values and to really live out those values when so much around us feels unsteady, rapidly changing, precarious, and deeply, deeply uncertain? One of the easiest places to feel the rapid pace of radical social change is in the university classroom. When I was a graduate student for the first time in the 90s, late 90s at Cornell University, I was expected to read hundreds of pages a week for one seminar class. And I'm sure I had at least 3 at the time. I was expected to come to class each week to discuss the ideas in those works. I was expected to analyze the material in relationship to the subject matter at hand, and I did each week without fail. 10 years ago, when I was teaching as a graduate student, a PhD student at McGill, my students were expected to scour through the thick packets of materials that I prepared for them each week. They were expected to jot notes in the margins. They were expected to come to class, raise their hands, and engage in detail deeply with the materials before them. And they did each week without fail. But things in the university classroom have changed. These days, I find myself sometimes projecting text from articles onto screens for my students to read aloud together. Afterwards, I'll ask my students if we can translate the materials, the text that we just read together. Sometimes in class, we do a line-by-line analysis of the theories and concepts that we're unpacking. We know that between 2010 and 2015, the combination of the front-facing camera and the mass adoption of smartphones by kids, by teenagers, created a really fundamental shift in learning, classroom learning, and attention. And my students today were once those children. Those are children who experienced what psychologist John Haidt refers to as the great rewiring of childhood. My students who now at times read aloud in class with me are those who have developed what he refers to as the habit of interruption, the habit that I also see in my own 3 teenagers. I can see that many of my students have lost the capacity for deep, sustained, focused, long lectures, which reading long scholarly articles and cases and books, of course, requires. They've lost the capacity, as my teenagers have, for long, sustained focus because the neural pathways for that kind of attention, well, have been weakened over the last decade and a half from scrolling, from gaming, and from spending hours each day on TikTok, Instagram, or other quick reward-based machines. Yet, as my students have shifted, so have my pedagogical practices. In Canadian universities across the nation, you can also see the radical changes happening as downsizing occurs. It's no secret, of course, that arts and humanities courses are being rapidly disappeared across North America, both in Canada and, of course, in the United States. English, history, philosophy, foreign languages are all shrinking as majors in the last decade to 15 years. Our society has placed enormous pressures on universities in response to both social and economic changes. And these are pressures that just didn't exist, at least not in the same degree as they do now 15 years ago. Today, I often think that parents and students increasingly demand a direct pathway to a job after graduation. In 1992, I was a philosophy major, a double major, but philosophy was my first love. Few students today dare to major in philosophy. AI, of course, is also kicking our butts, just like it is for many other middle class and professional jobs. I have a really bad habit of waking up in the morning and flipping to the technology or global section of the New York Times. And the other morning at about 4:30 a.m., I came across this article. It was an article that caught my attention so much that I read through it twice in one sitting, writing both about the speed, the current capabilities, and the inevitability of AI. The author, Paul Ford, ended his article with this: "The truth is that I'm less valuable than I used to be. It stings to be made obsolete, but it's fun to code on the train too. I too am a member of a professional class, a professionalized class, an academic professor, and I too am less valuable in the university hierarchy than I used to be. And I'll be even more blunt. I'm 100% certain, without fail, that my department, as well as many other departments, will not be around in the next decade, perhaps the next 5 years. Change is coming, and change feels rapid, precarious, uncertain." I want to return to that question that I asked at the start. What does it mean to hold on to our most cherished values? How do we embody these values, live out these values, when so much around us feels unsteady, precarious, deeply uncertain? Well, on a personal note, next year I'm going to take my first year-long sabbatical. And during that time, I will be learning something new. I'll be preparing potentially for a career shift, should I need to shift with the times. But on a larger scale, what this question means is that we need to shift. All of us need to shift and think about what that shifting looks like. This quality of emergent adaptability is a quality that has been honed in me as a scholar of Black history, as someone who works in the area of history as a historian at times, but also as a Black woman who understands the beautiful, permanent thread that connects and weaves us together as Black peoples across a beautiful and rich Black diaspora. It's a quality that I first began honing hesitantly as a student of Octavia Butler in the late 90s. For her, change is a permanent state and also very much a spiritual state. In her book, Parable of the Sower, she teaches that all successful life is adaptable, opportunistic, tenacious, interconnected, and fecund. The quality of emergent adaptability refers to our ability to imagine and develop novel solutions, and it calls on us to continually adjust to unexpected challenges. It is the truest thing that our ancestors knew and continue to know. Emergent adaptability is expressed when we're able to sense and respond to the unique, unchanging circumstances that are occurring in the very moment we're living in. Think of a large tree that has to find alternative pathways to anchor its beautiful and dense roots into the earth regardless. Think of sudden murmurations of birds who move in a gorgeous and collective precision to successfully, together, ward off predators. The answer to this question does not rest with elite decision makers in this current moment. It's a question that cannot be answered meaningfully by those who hold the most power in this moment. Instead, our current moment demands our emergent adaptability, our radical imaginations, and both are steeped in our anti-colonial cultural traditions and threaded together across a Black diaspora that is wide and stretches over centuries. Most importantly, our lineage of adaptability and imagination entails refusal. That is, refusing, disavowing a scarcity mindset when things get really, really tough and challenging, like right now. There's one thing that I know to be certain in our moment today, and that is our lineage of teachers, intellects, philosophers from across the Black diaspora have always taught us that scarcity and anti-Blackness go hand in hand, that scarcity is an intentional moral and political formation, that scarcity is always a story about who deserves care and who does not, who deserves safety, who deserves time, and who deserves access to the future. That story of scarcity has always been racialized. Frantz Fanon, the great Martinican psychiatrist, spent his entire lifetime studying the precise internal psychic damage caused by French colonialism. He taught me, as a young 18-year-old kid, freshman, how a scarcity mindset becomes lodged inside the mind of the oppressed, the colonized. And at 18 years old, I learned from Frantz Fanon how European colonizers hoarded resources, hoarded land and humanity, and how the colonized, living under conditions of incredible scarcity, in turn, often internalized a desire for the colonizer's position. Sylvia Wynter, the brilliant Jamaican theorist, taught me how the West naturalized a wildly narrow and exclusive idea of the human as a primarily economic being, Homo economicus, who is driven by scarcity, by competition and self-interest. In all of her writings, she was hyper-focused on a fundamental reimagining of what it means to be human, well outside of that logic of scarcity and competition. Abundance for Sylvia Wynter is not material wealth, but a richer and more complex understanding of what it means to be human. I fell in love with the Guyanese historian Walter Rodney in graduate school in the late 90s at Cornell. He taught me that scarcity is absolutely not a natural condition for Black people, but a result of centuries of intentional practices, the transatlantic slave trade, colonial extraction, and neo-colonial debt structures that persist today. He taught me forever that Europe's abundance was built upon Africa's imposed scarcity. And he taught me to believe in scarcity as a permanent or natural state is to ignore this history of intentional European theft. Audre Lorde, the queer poet and writer who was so proud of her Caribbean heritage from both Barbados and Grenada, taught me as a young woman that scarcity lives at the very center of all patriarchy and all capitalism, that these systems, patriarchy and capitalism, teach us to fear our deepest feelings, our deepest desires, and our connections to one another. Scarcity, Audre Lorde insisted, teaches us to believe that we are never, ever enough as Black people. I often joke with friends and colleagues that there is only one book that I've really read since 1997, written by a theorist and historian whose work has impacted me more deeply than any other in my life, Saidiya Hartman. Her book, Scenes of Subjection, anchors scarcity and a scarcity mindset firmly within the captures and confines of whiteness. Recently, she wrote another book that I'm sure I'll be reading for another 20 years called Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments. And here, she looks at the lives of Black women, the urban poor, who lived in the late 19th and 20th century in major cities in the United States. These are Black women who history has only cared to document through records and archives of crime, poverty, or social failure. But when Saidiya Hartman returned to these same archival documents, she uncovered something much more than the criminality or survival sex work or the waywardness imposed upon Black mothers and Black women of the time. She uncovered evidence of young Black women who refused to be docile workers, Black women who were punished for their refusals but continued on anyway, Black women who insisted on feeling pleasure and loved whoever they choose. These Black women created new forms of family life and meaning in the context of profound scarcity and hardship. This is what she means when she uses the expression beautiful experiments in living in the title of her book. Recently, I started this new podcast on Fela Kuti. And when I was in law school, I used to throw these parties in which we would only play Fela Kuti all night long. Brilliant. And no one ever complained for hours because the music is so good that you can never hear its repetition, only its rhythm. And I thought before I started this 13 series podcast that I knew a lot about him. As it turns out, there's so much that I didn't know. Like how in 1969, he met this woman, Sandra Isidore, a Black American woman, influenced by the Black Power movement and the writings of Malcolm X. And it's this woman who would directly influence his political consciousness and the radical lyrics and music that he is best well known for. I learned also that he had been arrested 200 times, jailed at least 100 times, beaten by police and the military again and again and again for simply refusing to shut his mouth, for refusing to stop singing songs of protest that criticize the government and the police and multinational corporations in his country. He refused again and again and again. In the context of incredible loss, violence, and scarcity, Fella continued running his mouth until his death in 1997. All of these people, all of these Black intellects refused a scarcity mindset. They lived and studied the lives of those anchored in emergent adaptability. Fella was also a perpetual shapeshifter, Eshu in Yoruba, a divine trickster, a spiritual messenger, an agent of chaos who challenges what is not righteous and just. And as I've thought about him consistently over the last few weeks, listening to this podcast, finally finishing this podcast about his life, I've wondered endlessly why he continued to run his mouth with risk of such great physical harm continually coming to him, why he continued to use his music, to borrow from one of his favorite expressions, as his weapon. As I learned just a week or two ago, his reason for continuing on was actually a very simple one. And it's a reason for being that I have heard over and over again in my conversations, in my interviews with colleagues and other Black academics, other Black professionals, other Black students across my lifetime. Fella's resolve, his doggedness, his tenacity, if you will, was because of this woman, Fumilayo Ransome Kuti, his mother who died in 1998 after being thrown out of a second-story window by the Nigerian military. Fumilayo Ransome Kuti was one of Nigeria's most important anti-colonial feminists, and she too had been in prison. Fella grew up watching a woman who never compromised with power, who never shut her mouth. And for him, quitting would have meant betraying her legacy and her name. All of these Black thinkers have another important thing in common. In universities, they're taught through the humanities, in English, history, philosophy, and the arts, the very subjects that are being disappeared as we speak. If I had been an engineering major at Howard University, I would not have been exposed in depth to the ideas and writings of Sylvia Wynter, C.L.R. James, Frantz Fanon, Audre Lorde, Walter Rodney. Their ideas are absolutely foundational to the last century's anti-colonial movement, civil rights struggles, and these ideas are anchored at the center of all Black radical thought. One more thing, in a world where the humanities and arts seems to be disappearing, it's not easy to guess who still overwhelmingly prioritizes these subjects. The elite, the nation's wealthiest and their children. I learned preparing for this talk today that 84% of philosophy degrees are from either selective or highly selective universities, where the elite's children disproportionately attend, right? The Ivy Leagues, the Harvards, Yales, the McGills, the elite international universities, at a time when many colleges are cutting liberal arts programs, elite universities, Princeton, Oxford, Yale, and the like, are channeling their endowment strength and donor support into a renewed embrace of the humanities. And so the disappearance of the humanities in this moment is not an accident. It is very much a class project. As one author recently explained, the children of the very wealthy are still allowed to ask what it means to live a good and free life. Everyone else is told to go and be employable. Scarcity has always asked a quiet question of us: who must live with less so that others can feel secure? But scarcity does so much more than organize or distribute resources unequally. It reorganizes how we think. Scarcity narrows the field in our minds of what is possible. It trains us to manage decline instead of building upwards and shoring up possibility. Under conditions of scarcity, importantly, survival can become competition. Solidarity can feel like a big risk. Scarcity reframes structural violence and failure as personal inefficiency, a personal failing. Scarcity reframes structural violence and institutional failure as a personal insufficiency, a personal failing. It tells us in the moment, adapt quietly, compete politely, but never ever ask who designed the current conditions for our suffering. When I speak about emergent adaptability, I'm not talking about a hustle culture. I'm not speaking even about reinventing ourselves, endlessly reinventing ourselves to survive institutional abandonment. We cannot be naive about the world that we are inhabiting. We have to remember that institutions are unstable. Work is precarious. The ground is shifting beneath so many of us in this current moment. To refuse scarcity is not to deny material constraint, but refusal means rejecting the lie that constraint should redefine or capture our imagination and turn us away from one another. It means rejecting the idea that we must shrink our values to match unstable systems. And refusal is how we remain whole in this current moment. I want to leave us with just 3 practices, just 3 for our current moment. These are practices that refuse scarcity while accepting the inconceivable conditions that continue to mount up in front of us. These are practices that refuse the lie of competition, practices that allow us to anchor ourselves in solidarity as an act of resilience and absolute resistance. Excuse me. The first is wellness now. What amount of suffering or lack is enough for you to finally prioritize your wellness holistically? Yes, of course, I'm talking about physical health, but also the emotional and mental health, your spiritual and sexual health. Arlene Geronimus's 30-year body of research teaches us that a body that has been raised to work the hardest, to achieve half as much and be twice as good, also makes us the sickest, the illest over time. What amount of suffering or lack is enough for you to finally prioritize your wellness? We need each other. Scarcity is not neutral. Scarcity is politically useful. In moments of crisis, scarcity is deliberately manufactured to turn communities and human beings against each other. We're told that there are only so many jobs, so many homes, so much safety, only so many resources. And they, in air quotes, are taking what belongs to us, also in air quotes. In these moments, together and organizing is absolutely where our power lies. And finally, where can you shift? Because we must. To return to Octavia Butler's words, beautiful words, all successful life is adaptable. Where can you shift your learning or move your learning and skills? Where can these things nudge you into a new direction, into a new area of learning or even expertise? Seize change, use it, adapt, and grow in our current moment. Thank you so much. I'll pause here and look forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zellars. I wrote a lot of notes. No, it was great. We're going to open now the floor to questions or comments. As we do still have quite a bit of time to get the conversation going. So I invite those who are present with us to use the raise hand function. If you would like to say something, you should be able to open your mics after that as well. And also the chat function, which should also be available to everyone. Just give people. Okay. Yes, I will. I see a hand raised, so Jackie, I believe that's you. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Suella. Thank you very much, Dr. Zellers. There's a lot of material in there for me to certainly reflect on, and the issue of sort of emergent adaptability in the face of shifting, I'm just going to say, government priorities, which can be read for code for a whole bunch of other sort of decision-making rubrics that reshape how we privilege certain types of education and certain types of programs. And that to me is a really interesting question around practices in relation or responses in relation to scarcity. And the final question of your or propositions in terms of where can we shift to now. What advice would you give to students who are finding themselves sort of at the nexus of things are changing within the academy, and some of those changes, no doubt, are needed within colonial systems for sure. But what does that mean in terms of the future of post-secondary education? I'd just be interested in hearing your thoughts on that. Where do we shift to now within the post-secondary sector, given this push from the federal government to kind of focus on and privilege certain types of knowledges? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jacqueline. I think that's such a great question. So hard too, because there's so much that we don't control. Yeah, there's so much that we don't control. I don't know if I have a great answer. I think that one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is where do the ideas and beliefs that anchor me come from, right? Where do they come from? And what were the qualities about those thinkers, those philosophers, those teachers that were threaded through all of their ideas? What were the conditions that they lived in, that they developed their writings in? I often think of Frantz Fanon, who was, writing during the war, after the war, and Audre Lorde, who was writing poetry as she was dying of cancer and being pushed out of the academy. Because of the conditions that, made her sickness, exacerbated her sickness, right? So I think that what we owe our students is a reminder of some of these thinkers, particularly those that are Black and Indigenous and racialized. Like, we owe our students a return to these ideas, because they're radical ideas. They don't shift with the current moment. I read Frantz Fanon for the first time at 18, and the things that come out of his first series of books are still very much within my value system as a 51-year-old woman. So I think that we owe a refusal to the disposal of humanities, right, and arts and liberal arts in this moment by returning to these ideas. And most importantly, helping our students understand these are not just ideas. These are like guiding templates that will move with you for the next 3 or 4 or 5 decades until you leave this earth. This is not only an idea, but this will become the work. This will become your pathway. So that's a very basic thing. I think we also owe a responsibility to students I think we have a responsibility as educators to get better up to speed on what AI is doing. As a freshman in 1992, I was obsessed with Jaron Lanier. I don't know if anybody remembers Jaron Lanier's work, but he was like the father. He's considered the father of AI. He's this big, heavy, like Jewish guy who had long dreadlocks, right? And as a freshman, this is like 1992. I remember going, yo, this guy is so out there. But all of his ideas from 1992, somehow in me, I believed him. That's when we were just talking about AI, like Google's right to watch futuristic stuff. But Jared Lanier was always talking about what's happening right now. He was always obsessed with what's happening right now. And so I think that one of the things all of us owe our students as educators is to really understand what AI means, what it's always meant. And even if we're simultaneously parents who are feeling guilty for handing over a phone way too early, we have a responsibility and an ability to shift. What it means for our students is to say, yeah, this may not be here, but here are possibilities for you to live a good life. I think we're also very much in a moment. So let me take a step back and respond to the second part of this question. I was with some leaders last week in government, and one of them, a Black woman, is like leading the federal government AI, like across government plan, right? Like she's mapping it out for all of government. And she said something really profound I've been thinking about. She said, I keep being told that I am in charge of designing and helping departments implement technologies that are going to make their work really much easier and efficient. That's what I am told to message. But I'm really, really smart and good at what I do. And what I know is that I'm creating work that's going to disappear tens of thousands of jobs. That's what I'm doing. And that's really what's intended. And so we need to listen to those voices. And we need not to be tethered to fear for the reasons that I tried to set forth in our presentation. Like that is the demand of white supremacy, of capitalism, of patriarchy. Our ancestors have always, 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 always known that. We cannot be fearful, but we have to be wide-eyed and salient. And we have to be able to translate possibilities to our students in ways that we're just, I think kind of many of us are starting to imagine, because we're shifting too, right? I mean, that's why I told that little anecdote about my students are learning in different ways. I'm not going to scream at them all day long to put away their cell phones. I mean, sometimes I do. I'm going to shift my pedagogical practices. I'm going to do that. So secondly, we owe a responsibility to our students to translate the realities of AI in this current moment. And then I guess the third thing I'll say that we owe our students is, and this I think is controversial, right? We owe our students room for imagining another world. One of the things I've started to share more openly is in my classroom, wherever I teach, there's always a jar at the front of the class with a couple $100 in it. And the first week of school, I teach the foundations of mutual aid. And I say to students, the most invisible identity marker in this classroom will be class. I don't know what you have, and you really don't know what I have. You can guess because I'm a college professor, right? But you can't look at each other and tell whose education is paid for, whose education is not. Who amongst you is working 2 jobs to pay for university and who is not? Whose parents have maybe a little trust fund or taking equity out of their home to help you buy your first home, and whose parents can't and are not. We can't read those things in the class, but what we can do when we share a relationship is try to even the playing field a little bit. So every week, if you have some class privilege, come and drop some money in this jar. And if you need groceries, take 40 or 60 bucks out. That's just how we roll. We have to start teaching our students that this is a good and righteous and necessary way to live under the conditions that are like mounting up before us. It's irresponsible, I think, for us not to bring these like outside of government, like strategies for wellness and survival into our spaces as a practice, but also encourage those in students. We have to start imagining something that doesn't involve the government and these systems taking care of us. So those are just three quick thoughts. It's a hard question because I think first, like I'm not gonna, you know, I don't have. There's a lot that we can't control, but now is a time for us to really think about what we can control and muddle and knock against in ways that make sure that we're doing more than surviving, but we have the ability to thrive and be well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that answer. I'm gonna pass on to the next question, reminding everyone that unfortunately we do have a hard stop at 1 p.m. Where we are online. So if anyone else has other questions, please raise your hands or type them in the chat. Demilade, I will open the floor for your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Zellars. It was really insightful. Nigerian, and Fela Kuti is actually from my country, so it was really encouraging when I saw that included in the presentation. I also like how you portrayed his mom, because many people do not know that side of the story and seeing that it was actually like a foreigner, and a movie was produced that showcased her life story that came out last year as well, or no, the year before in 2024. And it really portrayed how she was an active leader in the political space and helping to fight for women rights. And I think that was something that is very important in my country, because even though there have been series of protests, we see people not come in. So my question would be to you is, how do you see modes of communications, like Fela was a musician, like music and movies really pushing for the narrative and for the fight for Blacks to gain the opportunities they need to thrive in a space?
Sorry, Demilade, can you repeat the question again? I didn't get the full question.
Yeah, my question was that what is your take on communication tools like movies and music pushing for that narrative for Blacks to thrive and create the opportunities they need to survive in the space?
Thank you. I mean, we come from, I think all of us in the diaspora, we come from long traditions of music as a politic, music as protest, music as as a force that's not just you know, for pleasure, although we know how to pleasure ourselves through our arts better than anybody. And at the same time, all of us come from cultures where we struggle with the complexities of the person behind the music. And Fela Kuti was no different, you know, as a complex human being than other musicians. You know, I don't know what to say other than the podcast series is really comprehensive and profound. And if there's one thing I want us to all take away, it's that we know complexity, and it's like disposability of one another is really irresponsible, and a technique and technology that whiteness has used to sully the complexities that live in each and every one of us. It's much more generative to lean into those complexities and see, in the context of love, what can be nudged to greater righteousness, if you will. You know, what I'll say about Fela quickly is that he always had women around him who nudged him to a higher version of himself. And because he gave so much, he really did suffer at the end, you know. And I think that's true. I mean, that's true for so many of us. You know, we we talk about like Martin Luther King today, right? You've heard this expression. Everybody's like, oh, he belongs on a children's book. But you know, those of us that know history know that he was really despised. At the time of his death, he had become way too radical, way too class and multi-class and multi-race solidarity focused in a way that was threatening, like totally threatening to the status quo. So, you know, it's we have to remember that we know Black genius. Complexity is who we are, but the ethic of disposability is not ours, right? We owe something much higher to one another, even as we challenge the parts of us that are violent and harmful. Let me be clear, that's not excusable. But the ethic of disposability, that's not ours. That's white supremacy. We have to refuse that. I really appreciated your comment. As soon as I saw your name, I said, okay, here she comes, coming. Let's go. Good to meet you, Demi Levy.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Delphina, you want to open your mic and your question?
My mic is on now, right? Fantastic.
It is, yes. Thank you.
Well, let me just say, first of all, that was something else. It really, really was. Dr. Zellars, Rachel to me, we know each other. I have to say that you've painted such a vibrant and critical picture of how, you know, the humanities, scarcity, AI, and shifting and pivoting, you know, how they relate one to the other, how the intersectionality of those things. It's just been a lecture that I have to say in the last number of years, one of the best I've experienced for what. So let me just offer you your flowers and how stimulating your talk was. It just really touched me in so many ways. And you took me down memory lane too, because I remember living in Toronto in the early 90s and late 80s and going to a Fela Kuti concert and how amazing that was. The hall was just filled with people. And I thought about, you know, some of the things you said about the many great scholars, you know, and what's interesting is these great thinkers. And when we think of the humanities and we think of the academy, that especially here in Canada, I mean, like Audre Lorde, I mean, when I think of Frantz Fanon or Walter Rodney, I mean, these are people that I remember reading at a very young age because, of course, I was not encountering these books in any school or any program that I ever took or anywhere. And I remember reading Black Skin, White Mask, Frantz Fanon when I was 14. I think I might have absorbed 10% of it. So I read it again when I was 19. I might have got 50%. I read it again when I was 30. I'm due to read it again. But these great thinkers, you know, from the academy, amazing. So I now I hope there's a question in here, and I look at the academy in Nova Scotia just to give the local context where you were teaching here in the institution of higher learning here in Nova Scotia. Here we all are at this lecture, and even if we were to extend to beyond our immediate to say Canada. So when you drew the story of the humanities and the folks who are at the Harvards and at the Yales and at the other Ivy League institutions where their children are still getting to have those questions, those conversations, and ask the critical questions that everybody else can't, because they're still accessing that very important liberal arts and humanities knowledge that many others are not. So when I think of that, how? So here's my question then, or just not I'm expecting a big answer, but at least a conversation, a little something. How do we make a case for the preservation of the humanities when these great thinkers were never on anybody's syllabus here anyway. So how do we even engage with that idea? Because as you paint this critical picture, we inherently see the loss. Because here we are, we're just getting started, where we have scholars like yourself, scholars like people that we know, like Chike Jeffers at Dalhousie in the philosophy department, and the young woman that he just had do the PhD under him. So we're just getting started at the time at which, it's so poor that they're pulling all this back. But then, how do we make the case for the importance of it when we have never yet even have peak at all in feeling like there's a loss, like, oh gosh, we're going to lose out. So you had the great, as you know, and I'm so thankful you shared this with us, going to college in the United States. There's Black colleges there, and there's like that whole tradition there, something we haven't had here. So this is the joy of you having been exposed to these folks, not being a 14. You didn't have to do what I did at 14, read a book and only understand 10% of it, because there's nobody to walk me through it. But so the question here is, and I'm sorry for rambling, is that how do we make a case for preserving these humanities when people say, well, I never got a chance to study that stuff anyway. There was nothing like that being taught at Mount St. Vincent. There's nothing like that being taught at St. Mary's or Dalhousie or Katy, or we just weren't doing it. Maybe Oise, on a long scale. Yeah. So anyway, I'll just stop
So
there.
Thank you so much for all that you said. I'm so sick today. As you can tell, my energy is like,
I heard you coughing.
child, the COVID just whooped up on me.
Okay.
So I'm gonna return flowers in a very like public and important way to Delvina Bernard, because Delvina is asking me a question that Delvina can answer by way of her own embodiment, by way of how you have lived your entire life, how you have built a home and raised your children, right? I mean, you are an intellect and an artist. Your children are intellects and artists. Your partner is an intellect and artist. Like, and it's a gift to witness, but it is, I think, something that just needs to be amplified. That you embody the answer to your own question on a very like personal and political scale. In terms of how we make the case, I don't know if there's a good answer for that institutionally, because I just got my course schedule for next year, in which 4 more courses were being cut from my department, right? And I'm being told, you can't teach this course anymore. So I'm scrambling real time to figure out what I'm going to create, what I'm going to teach, who's going to teach what. Those are institutional realities that, I can make some noise about, but ultimately I can't control. I got to pick and choose my battles too, because, we can fight. But some things we just need to say, okay, where can I find some crevices of freedom? I'm going to just shout out Chevy Eugene, who's teaching over at Dow and teaching a course on the history of Black radical thought. He always teaches a course that is anchored in the traditions that I just gave you all a snippet of across the semester. So, Dalhousie is giving him permission, but he is making that a priority as part of his own pedagogy and his career. L. Jones, it has like all of this stuff is like, drinking water for her that I ran through. And I know that she is trying to preserve and bring these ideas into her courses where you are at MSVU, where we all are today. I don't know that there's a great answer. The institution is going to institutionalize, right? It's going to do what it's going to do. I think that one of the most radical and important ideas in this moment is to remember that we don't have to behave in kind. We do not have to. Even if we need these jobs, we can find ways of just recalling and remaining, the sankophizing of what we know, what we embody. It's going to be all right. What I do want to insist is that we need to bring more attention to, and maybe this is in part a response to your question. We got to go. We need to do a bit more research on the disparity between what is being disappeared and who still gets to prioritize. Because if you pull the CVs of those in power, they didn't do STEM as majors. They were embedded in the arts, right? So we need to be just like wide-eyed about that reality, because it's creating a class chasm that's new, and we need to reckon with that in this moment. But thank you, Devon.
Thank you so much for all the questions and for your great answers as well, Dr. Zellars. We have come to the end of our time together, unfortunately. I feel like there is so much more to explore. I don't know if there are any other comments that Jackie, Dr. Gahagan wanted to make particularly before we wrap up.
Sure. Thanks, Suella. Again, just a big shout out and thanks and big gratitude for Dr. Zellars being here with us virtually. I know you are not feeling 100%, so thank you for doing this. And we certainly hope that you will have you back again. There's lots of questions to explore going forward around emergent adaptability. I think that's such a timely topic. So I hope that you will come back. And meantime, thank you very much for being with us today. And I hope you start feeling better soon. Take good care. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. And thank you, Suella. Thank you, Suella, for all that you've done today. Appreciate your help, and take care, everybody. Thanks again.